In July of 2015, 23-year-old Emma Hartley and her boyfriend Tyler Grant vanished without a trace while hiking the Cascade Pass Trail in North Cascades National Park, Washington. For over 7 years, they were presumed dead in one of America's most rugged wilderness areas. But in November of 2022, Emma walked into a gas station near Marblemount, alive but barely recognizable. What she told investigators when she was finally able to speak left even veteran detectives stunned. Where she'd been for those 7 years, what happened to Tyler, and how she survived, you will find out in this video. Before we dive into today's vanished story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe to Seek Stories for more mysterious disappearance cases. On the morning of July 18, 2015, the trailhead parking lot at Cascade Pass was already filling up with vehicles. It was peak summer hiking season in the North Cascades, and the weather forecast promised clear skies and temps in the low 70s. Perfect conditions for a day hike. Among the early arrivals were Emma Hartley and Tyler Grant, a young couple from Seattle who'd driven up the night before and camped at a nearby campground. Emma was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in environmental science. Tyler was 26, working as a junior architect at a firm downtown. They'd been dating for just over 2 years, and hiking had become their shared passion. A way to escape the city noise, disconnect from screens, and just be together in the mountains. According to friends who spoke to investigators later, the couple had been planning this trip for weeks. Cascade Pass wasn't their first rodeo. They'd done Mount Si, Rattlesnake Ledge, even parts of the Enchantments. They knew how to read a map, carried the 10 essentials, and always signed in at trailheads. That morning, surveillance footage from the ranger station showed them stopping to fill out the trail register at 8:42 a.m. Emma wore a light blue jacket and a green backpack. Tyler had on a gray hoodie and carried a larger pack with their lunch and water. The ranger on duty later recalled seeing them briefly, said they seemed excited, maybe a little nervous. It was Emma's first time on this particular trail, and Tyler had hyped it up as one of the best views in the Cascades. The plan was straightforward. Hike up to Cascade Pass, about 3.5 miles with an elevation gain of around 1,800 feet. From there, maybe push a bit further to see Sahale Arm if they felt strong. Then loop back down, grab dinner in Marblemount, and head home to Seattle. Simple. Safe. They told the ranger they'd be back at the trailhead by 5 p.m. Another group of hikers, a middle-aged couple from Portland named Dan and Sarah Brooks, saw Emma and Tyler around 10:30 that morning. They were about halfway up the trail, taking a water break near a switchback. The Brooks couple remembered them clearly because Emma had asked to borrow their trail map for a second. She wanted to compare it with the one on Tyler's phone. They chatted for a few minutes. The couple said Emma and Tyler seemed happy, maybe a little tired from the climb, but nothing unusual. After a few photos and some small talk about the wildflowers blooming along the trail, they parted ways. The Brooks continued up. Emma and Tyler said they were heading up too, just at a slower pace. That was the last confirmed sighting of them. By late afternoon, the parking lot began to empty out as groups returned from their hikes. Cars pulled away one by one, but Emma's silver Honda Civic stayed put. 5 p.m. came and went, then 6, then 7. The sun started dipping behind the peaks, and the temperature dropped fast. By 8 p.m., when the last few hikers trickled back, Emma and Tyler's car was the only one left. Around 9:15 that evening, Emma's mother called the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office. She explained that her daughter and Tyler had planned to be home by 8 at the latest. Neither of them was answering their phones. The calls went straight to voicemail. She'd tried texting. Nothing. Her gut told her something was wrong. The sheriff's dispatcher contacted the North Cascades National Park rangers immediately. Within 30 minutes, a park ranger and 2 other park staff drove to the Cascade Pass trailhead. They confirmed the Honda Civic was still there, doors locked, no signs of damage or struggle. The ranger ran the plates. Vehicle was registered to Emma Hartley. He called in a search request. That night, 2 rangers hiked the first mile of the trail with high-powered flashlights and called out Emma and Tyler's names. The forest swallowed their voices. No response. The terrain beyond the first mile was too dangerous to navigate in the dark. especially without knowing where the couple might be. The decision was made to pause until first light and mobilize a full search team at dawn. By 6 a.m. the next morning, a coordinated search and rescue operation was underway. The Whatcom County SAR team, supported by volunteers from Skagit County, assembled at the trailhead. 32 people total, including canine units, paramedics, and experienced mountaineers. The weather was holding steady, but everyone knew the North Cascades could turn hostile fast. The plan was to sweep the main trail first, then branch out into side routes and off-trail areas where inexperienced hikers sometimes wander. The Cascade Pass Trail is well marked, but there are plenty of spots where someone distracted or tired could veer off course. Steep drop-offs, hidden creek beds, loose scree slopes. One wrong step and you're sliding down a ravine. Search teams moved in pairs, checking every bend, every overlook, every water source. The canine units, 2 German shepherds trained in wilderness tracking, picked up scent trails along the main path but kept losing them near the 3-mile mark. That area, just before the pass itself, is where the terrain opens up. More exposure, more wind. Scent disperses quickly there. By midday, the teams had covered the primary trail and started pushing into the surrounding forest. They checked known campsites, looked for signs of a tent or sleeping bags, scanned for clothing, gear, anything. Helicopters joined the effort around 2 p.m., flying low over the ridges and valleys, using thermal imaging to detect body heat. Nothing. The forest below was dense, old-growth firs and hemlocks creating a canopy so thick that even from above, visibility was near zero in places. One team found a granola bar wrapper near a stream crossing. Brand matched what Tyler's roommate said he usually carried. But the wrapper was wet, half buried under moss. Could have been there for days, weeks even. Another team spotted a torn piece of blue fabric caught on a branch near a steep embankment. It looked similar to Emma's jacket, but without more evidence, it was inconclusive. Both items were bagged and logged. Day 2 brought no breakthroughs. Searchers expanded the perimeter, moving deeper into the backcountry. They checked ridge lines, alpine meadows, even the shores of nearby Doubtful Lake. The theory was that maybe Emma and Tyler had decided to extend their hike beyond the original plan. Maybe they'd gotten ambitious, pushed for Sahel Arm, and then something went wrong. An injury, exhaustion, hypothermia. The Brooks couple who'd seen them last were interviewed again. They confirmed the timeline, confirmed Emma and Tyler seemed fine, physically and mentally. No signs of distress, no arguments, no indication they were planning to go off-trail. But the couple also mentioned something else. They said they'd noticed another man on the trail that day. Older, maybe mid-50s, hiking alone, carrying a large pack, military style. He'd passed them earlier in the morning going up, and they'd seen him again on their way down, sitting off to the side of the trail, just watching. They didn't think much of it at the time. Plenty of solo hikers in the Cascades. But now, looking back, Sarah Brooks said something about him felt off. The way he stared. Didn't nod or say hi when they walked past. Rangers took notes. Ran a check on recent permits and trail registrations. Found a few solo male hikers logged in that day, but none matched the description closely enough to narrow it down. And without a name or photo, there wasn't much they could do. By day 4, the search area had expanded to over 20 square miles. More helicopters, more volunteers, more resources poured in. Emma's family arrived from Seattle, handing out flyers at the trailhead, pleading for information. Tyler's parents flew in from California. The media picked up the story. Local news, then regional. Couple missing in North Cascades. The pressure was on. But the mountains gave nothing back. On day 7, weather moved in. A cold front brought heavy rain and fog, cutting visibility to less than 50 feet in some areas. Search operations had to be scaled back for safety. Teams could barely see each other, let alone spot clues. The rain was relentless, washing away any remaining scent trails the dogs might have picked up. After 12 days of intensive searching, covering hundreds of miles on foot and from the air, the official operation was suspended. The incident commander held a press conference. He explained that they'd done everything possible with the resources available. The terrain, the weather, the sheer size of the wilderness, all of it made continuing the search logistically unsustainable. Emma Hartley and Tyler Grant were officially classified as missing, presumed dead in wilderness. The case file was moved to inactive status. The families held a memorial service that fall. Friends shared memories, posted tributes online. Life moved on the way it always does, even when answers never come. The North Cascades kept its secrets. 7 years and 4 months later, on a cold November evening in 2022, a clerk working the night shift at a small gas station just outside Marblemount noticed someone stumbling toward the front door. It was nearly 11 p.m. The station was usually dead at that hour. Most locals were home, and tourists didn't come through much in November. The figure pushed through the door, and the clerk froze. It was a woman, barefoot, clothes torn and filthy, covered in mud and dark stains. Her hair was long, matted, falling past her waist. She was emaciated, pale, almost gray. Her eyes were wide, darting around the store like she expected something to jump out at her. Danny Reeves, working the night shift, later told police he thought she was homeless at first, or maybe on drugs. But then she opened her mouth. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. She said, "Help me, please. I need help." Danny grabbed his phone, called 911. The dispatcher kept him on the line while patrol units were dispatched. Meanwhile, Danny offered the woman water. She drank it so fast she started choking. He grabbed a blanket from his car, wrapped it around her shoulders. She kept looking at the door, flinching at every sound. When the deputies arrived 8 minutes later, they found her sitting on the floor near the counter, shaking uncontrollably. One of the deputies, a young officer, knelt down and asked her name. The woman stared at her for a long moment, like she was trying to remember how to speak. Then, in that same broken whisper, she said, "Emma. Emma Hartley." The officer didn't recognize the name immediately, but her partner did. He'd been on the force back in 2015. He remembered the case, the missing hikers. He radioed it in, requested medical support, and notified the sheriff directly. Emma was transported to Island Hospital in Anacortes. The initial medical assessment revealed someone who had survived the impossible. Doctors placed her under observation and began documenting what they found. But the full extent of her injuries would require specialists and days of careful examination. There were also signs of significant psychological trauma. When nurses tried to turn on the overhead lights in her room, she panicked, curling into a ball and covering her head. She couldn't tolerate bright light, couldn't handle being touched without warning. She also had significant memory fragmentation. When asked basic questions like what year it was or how long she'd been missing, her answers were inconsistent. Sometimes she said weeks, other times months. She had no clear sense of time. Emma was placed under medical observation for 72 hours before investigators could even attempt a formal interview. The FBI was brought in, given the federal jurisdiction of national parks and the nature of the case. Agent Mills, who specialized in abduction cases, was assigned to lead. When Agent Mills first sat down with Emma, she kept the room dim, spoke softly, asked permission before moving closer. She explained that Emma was safe now, that no one was going to hurt her, that they just needed to understand what happened so they could help. Emma's first statement was brief, fragmented. She said they'd been hiking, her and Tyler. They'd stopped to take photos near Cascade Pass. Then a man appeared. She didn't hear him coming. He was just there. He had a gun, told them to be quiet, to follow him. When Agent Mills asked what happened to Tyler, Emma's face went blank. She stared at the wall for a long time. Then she whispered, "He's gone. I don't know where." The man took him away. She couldn't describe where she'd been held, couldn't explain how she'd escaped. She said it was dark. Always dark, cold, wet. She said she counted days by carving marks into dirt with her fingernail. But she lost count, couldn't remember how many. The statement was recorded, but Agent Mills knew it wasn't reliable yet. Emma was still too traumatized. Her mind was protecting her by blocking out details. It would take time, therapy, maybe months before they could get a clear picture. But the physical evidence would tell the story Emma couldn't. Immediately after Emma's identity was confirmed and her initial statement recorded, the FBI coordinated with the hospital's medical team to conduct a comprehensive forensic examination. This wasn't just about treating her injuries. Every mark, every healed fracture, every nutritional deficiency would become evidence in building a timeline of her captivity. A forensic medical examiner brought in from Seattle led the assessment. She started with a full-body examination, photographing and documenting every visible injury. The process took nearly 6 hours, conducted in careful increments to avoid re-traumatizing Emma. The skeletal analysis revealed critical information. X-rays showed Emma's left wrist fracture had occurred approximately 3 to 4 years prior, based on the degree of bone remodeling and callus formation. The fracture had healed naturally, without any form of medical intervention or proper setting. This meant Emma had been in captivity long enough for a major bone injury to occur and heal completely on its own. The 3 rib fractures told a similar story. 2 were older, estimated at 5 to 6 years, while 1 appeared more recent, perhaps 2 years old. The varying ages of these injuries suggested repeated physical trauma over an extended period. None had been treated medically. All had healed misaligned, which would cause Emma chronic pain for the rest of her life. The medical examiner's report noted extensive muscle atrophy, particularly in Emma's lower extremities. The degree of muscle wasting, she wrote, is consistent with prolonged periods of restricted movement, possibly restraint. The patient's quadriceps and calf muscles show approximately 60% reduction in mass compared to baseline estimates for her age and build. Blood work revealed severe nutritional deficiencies that painted a grim picture. Vitamin D levels were almost undetectable, indicating Emma had been deprived of sunlight for years. Her vitamin B12 levels suggested a diet completely lacking in animal proteins or fortified foods. Iron deficiency was severe enough to indicate chronic anemia. Albumin levels, a key protein marker, were critically low, consistent with long-term starvation-level nutrition. These markers, the medical examiner explained to Agent Mills, don't develop in weeks or even months. We're looking at years of systematic malnutrition. Just enough food to keep her alive, but not enough to maintain healthy body function. The burn marks received particular attention. Under magnification, forensic dermatologists identified 12 distinct circular scars on Emma's forearms and shoulders, each approximately 5 to 8 millimeters in diameter. The pattern and depth suggested contact burns from a heated metal object, possibly the tip of a cigarette lighter or small branding tool. The scars showed varying degrees of healing, indicating the burns had occurred at different times throughout her captivity. Perhaps most telling were the restraint marks. Around both wrists and both ankles, Emma had developed permanent scarring in distinctive circular patterns. The scar tissue had formed in layers with older, deeper marks underneath more recent surface abrasions. This indicated prolonged, repeated use of restraints over years, not days or weeks. What we're seeing, the medical examiner told the FBI team in her briefing, is a body that has endured systematic, long-term captivity under extremely harsh conditions. The injuries are not consistent with wilderness survival or even short-term abduction. Every marker points to years of confinement in a dark, damp environment with minimal nutrition, restricted movement, and repeated physical trauma. The medical evidence established a baseline. Emma had been held captive for years. She had been restrained regularly. She had been kept in darkness. She had been fed minimally. And she had been subjected to deliberate physical harm multiple times throughout her captivity. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. This was systematic, organized, and it had been going on for 7 years. While the medical team documented Emma's physical injuries, the hospital's psychiatric unit began their own critical assessment. A trauma specialist with 20 years of experience working with abuse survivors was assigned to evaluate Emma's psychological state. The initial observations were conducted in Emma's hospital room, modified to reduce potential triggers. Curtains remained drawn to keep light levels low. Staff were instructed to announce themselves before entering and to move slowly, avoiding sudden gestures. The trauma specialist's first report noted several concerning behavioral patterns. Emma displayed extreme photosensitivity, a common symptom in individuals held in prolonged darkness. Even the dim bedside lamp caused visible discomfort. When a nurse accidentally opened the curtain wider than intended, Emma's immediate response was to cover her eyes with both hands and turn her face to the wall, remaining in that position for several minutes even after the light was reduced. Her acoustic startle response was similarly heightened. The sound of a medicine cart rolling past her door, footsteps in the hallway, even the soft beep of medical equipment triggered visible distress. Her body would tense, her breathing would become rapid and shallow, and her eyes would dart toward the door as if expecting an imminent threat. The patient exhibits classic symptoms of hypervigilance, the specialist noted. She is constantly scanning her environment for danger. Her nervous system remains in a state of high alert, even in objectively safe surroundings. This is consistent with prolonged exposure to unpredictable threats. Cognitive testing revealed significant impairment in several areas. Emma's ability to maintain focus was severely limited. During simple conversation, she could typically concentrate for only 30 to 40 seconds before her attention would drift. She would pause mid-sentence, losing her train of thought, or suddenly become fixated on sounds or movements in her peripheral vision. Temporal disorientation was particularly pronounced. When asked how long she believed she'd been missing, Emma's answers varied wildly within the same conversation. She might say a few months in one breath, then, years, maybe moments later. When shown a calendar and told the current date, she would stare at it without apparent comprehension. The patient has lost the ability to track time linearly, the specialist explained to Agent Mills. In captivity, particularly in darkness without day-night cycles, the brain's internal clock breaks down. Days, weeks, months. They all blur together into an undifferentiated experience of ongoing present. Emma also displayed repetitive self-soothing behaviors. During conversations, she would tap her fingertips together in a specific pattern, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, over and over. She would trace small circles on her wrist with her opposite hand. When stressed, she would rock slightly forward and backward. The specialist identified these as coping mechanisms Emma had likely developed during captivity to manage sensory deprivation and psychological distress. Trust and safety remained major obstacles. Emma struggled to make eye contact, even with female staff members who had been consistently gentle with her. When the specialist asked if she felt safe in the hospital, Emma's response was telling. She looked around the room, then said quietly, "I don't know what safe means anymore." The psychological team also documented symptoms of dissociation. During one session, while being asked about her experience, Emma suddenly stopped responding. Her eyes remained open, but she seemed to be looking through the specialist rather than at them. She remained in this state for approximately 2 minutes before gradually returning to awareness. When asked what had happened, she said she went away for a bit. Dissociation is a protective mechanism, the specialist explained. When reality becomes too overwhelming or threatening, the mind essentially disconnects. It's likely Emma relied on this coping strategy extensively during her captivity. Based on the comprehensive psychological assessment, the diagnosis was clear: severe post-traumatic stress disorder with features of complex trauma, typically seen in victims of prolonged captivity or systematic abuse. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic, noting that with proper treatment, Emma could make significant recovery, but the process would take years, not months. The patient's ability to provide detailed, reliable information is currently very limited, the specialist wrote in the report to the FBI. This is not due to unwillingness to cooperate, but rather to the profound psychological impact of her experience. Her memory is fragmented, her sense of time is distorted, and her cognitive function is impaired by ongoing trauma responses. The specialist recommended a gradual approach to further questioning, with sessions kept short, conducted in a low-stimulus environment, and always with a trauma counselor present. Pushing Emma too hard, too fast could not only fail to yield useful information but could also cause additional psychological harm and potentially impair her long-term recovery. The psychological assessment confirmed what the medical evidence suggested. Emma had endured years of captivity under conditions designed to break down her sense of self, her connection to reality, and her ability to track time or maintain hope. and somehow, against all odds, she had survived. While Emma recovered under medical supervision, unable to provide detailed geographic information about where she'd been held, the FBI's forensic team turned to the physical evidence her body carried. Every trace of soil, every microscopic particle, every biological specimen could help pinpoint her location during those 7 missing years. The head of the FBI's Environmental Forensics Unit traveled from Quantico to personally oversee the analysis. She assembled a team of specialists: soil scientists, botanists, entomologists, and geologists. Together, they would reconstruct Emma's environment from the traces she'd brought with her. The first priority was soil analysis. Forensic technicians had collected samples from Emma's clothing, her hair, under her fingernails, and from the soles of her feet. The samples were carefully preserved and transported to the FBI lab in Seattle. Under microscopic examination, the soil revealed a distinctive composition. It was a clay-rich sediment, dark brown to almost black in color, with high organic content from decomposed plant matter. The particle size distribution and mineral composition were cross-referenced against the USGS Geological Survey database for Washington state. The results narrowed the location significantly. The soil type was consistent with valley bottoms in the North Cascades, specifically areas with old-growth coniferous forests, high annual rainfall, and thick layers of decomposing organic material. This type of soil doesn't occur at higher elevations or in drier regions. It forms over centuries in low-lying, moisture-rich environments where fallen needles, leaves, and would slowly break down under dense forest canopy. We're looking at a very specific ecosystem, the environmental forensics lead explained to Agent Mills. This isn't generic Pacific Northwest forest. This is deep valley, likely near water, with minimal sunlight reaching the ground level. Next came pollen analysis. Forensic botanists examined microscopic pollen grains found in Emma's hair and clothing fibers. Using scanning electron microscopy, they identified grains from 2 dominant species: western red cedar and sword fern. While both plants are common throughout the Cascades, the concentration levels were significant. The pollen wasn't just trace amounts from casual contact. The density suggested Emma had been in direct, prolonged proximity to these plants, living among them, not just walking past them. The team's palynologist noted something else. The pollen preservation is interesting. These grains show protected degradation, suggesting they were deposited in a relatively stable, enclosed environment, not exposed to wind, rain, or direct sunlight. The entomology analysis provided even more specific data. 3 insect specimens were recovered from Emma's clothing and hair. The first was a springtail, a tiny arthropod that lives in soil and leaf litter. The second was a pseudoscorpion, another soil-dwelling species that prefers dark, moist conditions. The third was a specific type of fungus gnat whose larvae feed on decaying wood and fungi in underground or semi-underground environments. These are not insects you'd pick up from hiking through the forest, explained the forensic entomologist. These are species that live in very specific microhabitats, dark places, underground or heavily enclosed spaces, high humidity, decomposing organic matter. We're talking about an environment that's more cave-like than surface-level forest. The insects also provided timeline information. Based on life cycle stages and the condition of the specimens, the entomologist estimated Emma had been in contact with these species within 24 to 48 hours of her appearance at the gas station. She hadn't been wandering the forest for days. She'd left an enclosed environment very recently. The forensic team also analyzed fungal spores found on Emma's clothing. The species identified were saprophytic fungi that grow on rotting wood in dark, consistently damp conditions. The concentration suggested long-term exposure, not brief contact. Everything we're finding points to the same conclusion, the environmental forensics lead summarized in her report. The subject was held in an underground or semi-underground structure, surrounded by old-growth forest vegetation, in a location with poor drainage and minimal light penetration. The structure likely incorporated natural materials, possibly decaying wood, and was located in a valley bottom or depression where moisture accumulates. Using all the environmental data, The team worked with a geographic profiler to create a probability map. They overlaid soil types, vegetation patterns, elevation data, water sources, and distance from the gas station where Emma appeared. The highest probability zone emerged clearly. The Thunder Creek drainage basin, specifically the area east of the Picket Range where steep valleys create isolated pockets of old-growth forest. The terrain there is extremely rugged, with numerous small tributaries, dense canopy, and limited trail access. During the original 2015 search, these areas had received minimal attention because they seemed too remote for day hikers to reach. But the environmental evidence didn't lie. The soil, the pollen, the insects, the fungi all pointed to that specific region. Emma had been held somewhere in that 15-square-mile zone of nearly impenetrable wilderness. The question now, Agent Mills said, studying the probability map, is whether she was held in a natural shelter or something man-made. The environmental forensics lead pointed to the insect evidence. The presence of those specific species in those concentrations suggests modification of the natural environment. Someone created or significantly altered an underground space. We're not looking for a cave. We're looking for something someone built. The environmental forensics had given the FBI their first solid lead. Emma couldn't tell them where she'd been, but the microscopic traces she'd carried out of captivity could. Now they just had to find it. With a geographic area identified through environmental forensics, Agent Mills needed to narrow the search zone further before committing resources to a large-scale field operation. Standard interrogation techniques weren't working. Emma's fragmented memory and psychological state made verbal testimony unreliable. But there was another approach. The trauma specialist had noted during the psychological assessment that trauma victims often retain geographic memory in their subconscious. Even when conscious recall is impaired, the body remembers places associated with extreme fear, even when the mind can't articulate them. Agent Mills proposed a behavioral mapping exercise. No pressure, no questions, just observation of Emma's unconscious physiological responses to geographic stimuli. The session was arranged in a quiet room at the hospital. Emma was told she didn't have to participate if she didn't want to. She could leave at any time. The trauma specialist was present, along with a trauma counselor. A medical technician attached non-invasive sensors to monitor Emma's heart rate, skin conductance, respiratory rate, and pupil dilation. Agent Mills spread a large topographic map of the North Cascades across the table. The map covered the entire search area from 2015, plus the surrounding regions. Every trail, creek, ridge, and valley was marked in detail. Emma, Agent Mills said softly, you don't have to touch this or answer any questions. I'm just going to leave this here. You can look at it if you want. Or not. Completely up to you. For the first minute, Emma didn't move. She sat with her hands in her lap, eyes fixed on the wall. Then, slowly, her gaze shifted to the map. Her pupils dilated slightly. Heart rate increased from 68 to 75 beats per minute. The trauma specialist gave an almost imperceptible nod to Agent Mills. Physiological engagement. Emma's eyes moved across the map, not following any logical pattern at first. They drifted from the legend to the scale, to various unmarked sections. But when her gaze passed over the Thunder Creek drainage area, something changed. Her breathing quickened. Skin conductance spiked. Her hands, which had been resting calmly, began to tremble. Agent Mills said nothing, just watched. Emma's eyes moved away from Thunder Creek, scanned other parts of the map, then returned to the same area. This time, her whole body tensed. She leaned back slightly in her chair, putting distance between herself and the map. Elevated heart rate, the technician whispered, 89 beats per minute. To rule out random responses, Agent Mills rotated the map 90 degrees, changing its orientation. She pointed to various areas with no pattern, just random selections. Emma's physiological markers remained elevated but stable. Then Agent Mills's finger moved across the section representing Thunder Creek Valley. Emma's reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened. She pulled her hands up to her chest in a protective gesture. Heart rate jumped to 96. Respiratory rate increased to 22 breaths per minute. Do you recognize this area, Emma? Agent Mills asked gently. Emma stared at the map section, then slowly shook her head. But her body told a different story. The trauma specialist noted in the observations. Patient displays classic trauma-triggered recognition response. Conscious denial, while physiological markers indicate strong emotional association with geographic location. Agent Mills tried a different approach. She placed a blank piece of paper over most of the map, exposing only small sections at a time. When Thunder Creek was covered, Emma's markers gradually decreased. When it was revealed again, they spiked. The exercise continued for 20 minutes with multiple variations. The pattern remained consistent. Thunder Creek drainage area, specifically the section between Thunder Creek itself and the eastern slopes of the Picket Range, produced the strongest responses. Other areas, including the Cascade Pass Trail where Emma and Tyler had originally disappeared, produced minimal reaction. Her conscious mind may not remember the specific location, the trauma specialist explained afterward, but her subconscious absolutely does. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, has encoded that geography as a place of extreme danger. That's why her body reacts so strongly, even though she can't verbally identify it. The behavioral mapping exercise provided the confirmation Agent Mills needed. Combined with the environmental forensics, they now had a target zone of approximately 8 square miles. Small enough to search systematically. It was time to go into the field. Agent Mills coordinated with the National Park Service to organize a targeted search operation. This wasn't a massive volunteer effort like the 2015 search. This was small, specialized, and focused. 12 personnel total. For FBI agents with wilderness experience, for park rangers who knew the backcountry intimately, 2 search and rescue specialists with technical climbing skills, and 2 forensic technicians to document any findings. They also brought technology. 2 thermal imaging drones, ground-penetrating radar equipment, and a portable gas chromatograph to detect human presence markers in the soil. The team assembled at the Colonial Creek Campground on the morning of December 3, 2022. The weather was cold but clear. Agent Mills briefed everyone on the mission parameters. They were looking for an underground or semi-underground structure within the Thunder Creek drainage area. Something man-made but camouflaged. Something that had remained hidden for at least 7 years. We're not rushing this, Mills told the team. We move slowly, methodically. We document everything. If you see anything, fabric, metal, disturbed soil, call it in immediately. The search zone was divided into grid sections. Each team took a quadrant and moved through it systematically, using GPS to track their coverage and ensure no area was missed. The terrain was brutal. Thick underbrush, fallen logs covered in moss, streams cutting through narrow ravines. This was old-growth forest, untouched by logging, where trees that fell decades ago still lay decomposing on the forest floor. The first day yielded nothing. The teams covered 3 square miles, checking natural depressions, rock overhangs, anywhere that could shelter a structure. They returned to base camp as darkness fell, exhausted but committed to continuing. Day 2 brought the first breakthrough. A park ranger, working a section along a small tributary of Thunder Creek, noticed something odd. A sword fern growing at an unusual angle, as if its roots had been disturbed and it had grown back crooked. When he cleared away the surrounding vegetation, he found a piece of fabric tangled in the roots. Faded blue, torn, but with a distinctive pattern still visible. The fabric was photographed in situ, then carefully collected. Later analysis would confirm it matched the jacket Emma had been wearing when she disappeared 7 years earlier. We're close, Agent Mills said when she received the report. Expand the search radius around that finding. 20 meters in all directions. An hour later, another discovery. This time it was another park ranger who found it. A small plastic hair tie caught on a low branch, partially buried under years of accumulated leaf litter. Pink with white stripes. The kind you could buy at any drugstore, but the FBI would later match dye composition and manufacturing details to verify it likely came from the same batch Emma had purchased in Seattle before her trip. The items were close together, maybe 40 meters apart, but not in a straight line. They seemed random until the forensic team plotted them on a map. When connected, they formed a rough arc, as if someone had moved through this area repeatedly over time, leaving traces along a habitual path. People are creatures of habit, one of the SAR specialists noted. Even in captivity, if allowed any movement at all, they'll establish routes. Paths of least resistance. The team intensified their search in the area between the two findings. This is where the drones came in. Thermal imaging from above could detect temperature variations that human eyes couldn't see from ground level. One drone operator, flying a grid pattern over the target zone, noticed an anomaly on his screen. "I've got a cold spot," he reported over the radio. Approximately 30 meters northeast of the second fabric finding. Temperature differential suggests an underground void. Cold spots in thermal imaging can indicate caves, animal burrows, or human-made structures where air temperature differs from the surrounding soil. The team converged on the coordinates. First, they saw nothing, just more forest, more ferns, more moss-covered logs, more decomposing organic matter. But when a ranger began clearing away debris, following the thermal signature, his hand hit something solid, something that wasn't rock. Wood, a wooden plank, rough cut, weathered gray by years of exposure but still intact. It was large, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet, lying nearly flat but at a slight angle, as if covering something beneath. "Hold position," Agent Mills ordered. "Don't move it yet. I want photos from every angle first." The forensic technicians documented the plank's position, the surrounding area, the layer of moss and dirt that had accumulated on top of it. When they finally lifted it, they found exactly what Emma's body had suggested they would find. An entrance, leading down into darkness. The opening was narrow, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, just large enough for an adult to squeeze through. The edges were reinforced with additional timber, crude but functional, showing signs of hand tool construction. No power saw marks. Everything had been cut with an axe or hand saw. Before anyone descended, the team ran safety protocols. A portable gas detector was lowered on a cable to test for oxygen levels and toxic gases. Carbon monoxide, methane, hydrogen sulfide, all readings came back within safe parameters. The structure was ventilated somehow, probably through natural cracks in the surrounding earth. Agent Mills made the decision. "I'm going down first. One of you rangers is with me. Everyone else stays topside until we confirm it's stable." They descended using a lightweight aluminum ladder, headlamps cutting through the darkness below. The ladder went down approximately 8 feet before reaching a floor, packed earth, compacted by years of foot traffic. The bunker was larger than the entrance suggested. As Mills swept her headlamp across the space, the beam revealed a chamber roughly 12 feet long by 8 feet wide. The ceiling was low, maybe 6 feet at the highest point, supported by timber beams salvaged from the forest above. Some were old-growth logs, others were smaller branches lashed together with rope and wire. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of earth and decay. Mildew covered portions of the wooden supports. Water had seeped through the walls in places, creating dark stains on the soil. But it was the contents of the chamber that told the story. In one corner, a pile of filthy blankets lay crumpled on the ground. Next to them, several empty plastic water jugs, the kind you'd buy at a camping supply store. Food containers, mostly empty cans, were scattered along one wall. Labels weathered but readable. Canned beans, soup, vegetables. Cheap, long-lasting supplies. A battery-powered lantern sat on a wooden crate, long since dead. Next to it, matches in a waterproof container. But it was the far end of the chamber that drew Mills's attention. A second, smaller opening in the earth wall, leading to what appeared to be a separate space. She approached carefully, documenting everything with the camera mounted on her helmet. The second chamber was smaller, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, and it was clearly not living space. This was a confinement area. 2 iron rings were bolted into a wooden beam near the ground, one on each side of the small chamber. The metal was rusted but still solid. Frayed pieces of rope remained attached to both rings, the ends worn smooth, as if pulled against repeatedly over time. The walls of this smaller chamber bore marks. Scratches, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Some were shallow, barely visible. Others were deep gouges in the packed earth. They covered the walls at varying heights, suggesting they'd been made from different positions, sitting, standing, lying down. And there were the tally marks, groups of 5, 4 vertical lines and 1 diagonal, carved into the soil wall near the iron rings. Mills counted them section by section. The total exceeded 2,000 individual marks. If each mark represented a day, that was over 5 years of captivity documented in scratches on a wall. "Agent Mills," the ranger called from the main chamber. "You need to see this." Mills backed out of the confinement space and joined the ranger, who was crouching near one of the support beams. He pointed to something carved into the wood. Letters, crude but readable, scratched with something sharp. Maybe a nail or piece of metal. H+TG. Emma Hartley and Tyler Grant. Below that, more scratches. Words. "Help us." And a date. August 15th, 2015. Less than a month after they disappeared. The forensic team descended with evidence collection equipment. They worked for 6 hours, photographing every inch of the bunker, collecting samples from every surface. Hair samples found tangled in rough wood. Fingerprints lifted from the smoother surfaces of the water jugs and food containers. Fabric fibers caught in the cracks between timber beams. Everything would be analyzed, but Mills already knew what they'd find. This was where Emma had been held for 7 years. This was where she'd carved those tally marks, where she'd been restrained by those iron rings, where she'd scratched messages into the walls that no one would see for years. But there was something else, something that made Mills's stomach tighten. In the main chamber, near the entrance ladder, they found men's clothing. A t-shirt, jeans, hiking boots, all in sizes too large for Emma. The shirt had a logo on it, a local Seattle architecture firm. Tyler's workplace. But there was no sign of Tyler himself. No remains, no indication of what had happened to him. Just his clothes, left behind like discarded evidence. "We need to process every inch of the surrounding area," Mills told her team. "If Tyler was here, there should be more evidence. We need to find it." The search expanded outward from the bunker in concentric circles. Using ground-penetrating radar, the team scanned the forest floor, looking for anomalies. Disturbances in the soil that might indicate burial sites or hidden caches. On the second day of the expanded search, approximately 60 meters from the bunker entrance, the radar detected something. An area where soil density was different from the surrounding ground. Not quite a void, but disturbed earth that had been moved and replaced. The team marked the location and began careful excavation, working with trowels and brushes, the way archaeologists excavate fragile sites. They went down slowly, documenting each layer. At a depth of approximately 3 feet, they found fabric, more clothing, and beneath that, skeletal remains. The forensic anthropologist, brought in specifically for this possibility, examined the remains in situ before allowing them to be moved. Male based on pelvic structure. Approximate age late 20s. Height consistent with Tyler Grant's driver's license records. The clothing matched what Tyler had been wearing the day he disappeared. Gray hoodie, cargo pants, hiking boots. His wallet was still in the back pocket. Leather rotted but contents preserved. Driver's license confirmed it. Tyler Grant. The cause of death couldn't be determined with certainty from skeletal remains alone, but the position of the body suggested he'd been placed, not buried in a struggle. The forensic anthropologist noted this in her initial report, to be confirmed with further analysis in the lab. Tyler had been dead for approximately 7 years. He'd likely died not long after being taken, probably within the first weeks or months. The journal they'd later recover from the suspect would confirm this. Tyler had fought back, had tried to protect Emma, and had paid for it with his life. Emma had survived alone for all those years, imprisoned in that underground bunker, believing she was the only one left. With the bunker discovered and evidence collection underway, the FBI's forensic team worked around the clock to identify who had built it. The structure itself was handmade, requiring significant knowledge of wilderness survival and construction. Whoever had created this place had spent considerable time and effort. This wasn't opportunistic. It was planned, prepared, maintained over years. The first break came from fingerprint analysis. Multiple latent prints were lifted from the wooden surfaces inside the bunker, particularly from the support beams near the entrance and from the smooth surfaces of stored containers. The prints were processed and run through the FBI's integrated automated fingerprint identification system. Within hours, they had a match. Vincent Mercer, 54 years old, last known address in Marblemount, Washington, though that address was over a decade old. No current residence on file. No tax returns since 2008. No vehicle registration. No employment records. For all intents and purposes, Mercer had disappeared from official records around the same time he'd apparently started building his bunker. Agent Mills pulled Mercer's complete background file. What she found painted a disturbing picture. Vincent Mercer had served in the U.S. Army from 1987 to 2003, achieving the rank of Staff Sergeant in the 75th Ranger Regiment. His military record showed deployment to Somalia, Bosnia, and 2 tours in Afghanistan. He'd been trained in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, known as SEER training. This specialized program taught soldiers how to survive in hostile environments, how to build shelters, how to evade capture, how to resist interrogation. The skills Mercer had learned in the military, skills designed to help soldiers survive behind enemy lines, had been perverted into something else entirely. The techniques for building concealed shelters became methods for constructing hidden prisons. The training in isolation resistance became knowledge of how to break someone psychologically. But Mercer's military career hadn't ended well. In 2003, he'd been dishonorably discharged following a series of incidents. The details were partially redacted, but Mills could read between the lines. Insubordination, aggressive behavior toward fellow soldiers, paranoid accusations. A psychological evaluation noted possible PTSD and delusional thinking. After his discharge, Mercer had worked briefly as a wilderness survival instructor in Southern Oregon. Records from that employer showed he'd been terminated after 6 months. The reason? Inappropriate behavior with clients and concerning statements about government surveillance. From 2005 to 2008, Mercer appeared sporadically in public records. A rental agreement here, a traffic citation there. Then, nothing. He'd gone completely off-grid. But he hadn't vanished entirely. Local law enforcement records told another story. Mills found incident reports spanning from 2008 to 2015, all in the North Cascades region, all involving a man matching Mercer's description. In 2008, a hiker reported being threatened by a man with a rifle near Thunder Creek. The man had told the hiker he was trespassing on private property, even though the area was national park land. By the time rangers responded, he was gone. In 2010, 2 backpackers filed a complaint about a man who'd followed them for several miles along the Thunder Creek Trail, staying about 50 yards behind, never speaking but clearly tracking their movement. They described feeling watched, hunted. When they finally confronted him, he'd turned and disappeared into the forest. In 2012, a solo hiker encountered Mercer at a backcountry campsite near Doubtful Lake. The hiker later told rangers that Mercer had been paranoid, rambling about government agents using GPS to track citizens, claiming hikers were actually undercover operatives surveilling him. When the hiker tried to leave, Mercer blocked his path, saying, "No one leaves without permission." The hiker waited until Mercer was distracted, then ran. By the time rangers investigated, Mercer's camp was abandoned. Each incident had been logged, but none had led to charges. Mercer was always gone before authorities arrived. He knew the terrain too well, knew how to disappear. Mills also found something else in the records. In 2014, a full year before Emma and Tyler disappeared, a ranger had discovered an abandoned shelter in the Thunder Creek area. The report described it as a handmade wooden structure, partially underground, appears to be used as seasonal housing by an off-grid individual. The ranger had dismantled part of the entrance to discourage its use and filed a report about illegal habitation in the park. That shelter had been less than a quarter-mile from where the bunker was ultimately discovered. Mercer had been building practice structures, learning, refining his techniques. And when Rangers destroyed one, he simply built another. Better hidden. More secure. The FBI also found evidence of Mercer's movements through credit card records, though they were sporadic. Small purchases at hardware stores in Marblemount and Concrete. Camping supplies, rope, padlocks. Nothing overtly suspicious on its own, but when viewed as a pattern, it painted a clear picture. He was preparing. Psychological profilers reviewed all the evidence and produced an assessment. Mercer was a paranoid isolationist with military training and wilderness expertise. He viewed hikers as threats, possibly believing they were government agents. His deteriorating mental state, combined with his survival skills and knowledge of the remote terrain, made him capable of extreme acts while remaining virtually invisible to authorities. This is someone who's been planning for years, the profile concluded. The bunker wasn't built for Emma and Tyler specifically. It was built and waiting. They were targets of opportunity. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong person watching them. Mills stared at Mercer's military photo, taken 20 years earlier. Clean-cut, focused, the look of a professional soldier. She compared it to the description from the 2012 hiker encounter. Long hair, unkempt beard, wild eyes. 2 decades in isolation had transformed him into something else entirely. Now they had a name. They had a face. They had a profile. They just had to find him before he disappeared again. The FBI issued a federal arrest warrant for Vincent Mercer on multiple charges: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and murder. His photo, both the military ID from 2003 and an age-progressed version showing what he might look like now, was distributed to every law enforcement agency in Washington state. But Mills knew that standard police bulletins wouldn't be enough. Mercer had evaded detection for over a decade. He wouldn't be caught by a routine traffic stop or a lucky patrol. They needed to think like he did. "He knows we found the bunker," Mills told her team during a strategy session. "The moment we started searching that area with helicopters and ground teams, he would have known. So the question is, what does he do? Run or hide?" The behavioral analysts debated this. Running meant leaving his territory, the one place where he had every advantage. But hiding meant staying close to an active investigation. Both carried risks. "He'll stay," one analyst concluded. "His paranoia won't let him leave. This is his world. In his mind, everywhere else is more dangerous, more threatening. He'll try to wait us out." Mills agreed. "So we need to find his other caches." The bunker wasn't his only shelter. He had to have backup locations. The team analyzed Mercer's known movements from the old incident reports, creating a heat map of areas where he'd been sighted over the years. 3 zones emerged as high probability. One near Doubtful Lake, one along a remote section of Big Beaver Creek, and one in the Picket Range foothills. Search teams were deployed to all 3 areas simultaneously. They moved quietly, avoiding helicopter support that might alert Mercer. Instead, they used drones for aerial reconnaissance, flying high enough to avoid detection from the ground. On the 4th day of the manhunt, December 9th, a drone operator noticed something unusual near Big Beaver Creek. A small plume of smoke, barely visible against the gray winter sky. It was coming from a densely forested area with no trails, no campsites, no reason for anyone to be there legally. The tactical team moved in immediately. 6 agents, all with wilderness tactical training, approached from multiple angles to prevent escape routes. They moved slowly, using natural cover, communicating with hand signals to avoid radio chatter that might be overheard. They found the camp approximately 200 meters from Big Beaver Creek. A small lean-to shelter, barely visible under forest canopy, with a nearly smokeless fire burning inside a Dakota fire pit, a military technique that minimizes visible smoke. But Mercer wasn't there. Fresh footprints led away from the camp, heading deeper into the forest. He'd spotted them somehow, despite their careful approach and run. "He's moving northeast," one agent radioed. Heading toward the creek. The pursuit began. Mercer had a head start, but the agents were younger, fitter, and had backup. Additional teams were repositioned to cut off escape routes. A drone tracked Mercer's movement from above, feeding real-time location data to agents on the ground. Mercer was fast, moving through the terrain with the ease of someone who'd spent years navigating it. He jumped between rocks to avoid leaving tracks, used thick brush to break visual contact, doubled back twice to confuse pursuit. But he made one critical mistake. He headed for the creek, possibly thinking he could use the water to throw off tracking. Instead, he encountered an FBI agent and a park ranger, who'd been positioned there as a blocking force. When Mercer saw them, he changed direction sharply, running uphill toward a rocky outcrop. But the exertion, combined with his age and years of poor nutrition from living off-grid, caught up with him. He stumbled on loose scree, went down hard on the slope. By the time he got back to his feet, agents had closed the distance. Federal agents. Get on the ground. For a moment, Mercer looked like he might fight. His hand moved toward something on his belt, possibly a knife. But 3 red laser dots appeared on his chest simultaneously. FBI tactical team, weapons drawn. "Don't do it, Vincent," Mills called out. She joined the pursuit team specifically for this moment. "It's over. Get on the ground. Now." Mercer looked around, seeing agents on all sides, escape routes cut off. Something in his expression changed. Not surrender exactly, but recognition. He was caught. After 7 years of thinking he was untouchable, invisible, protected by his skills and the wilderness, he'd been found. He dropped to his knees, then to the ground. Hands behind his head, the way he'd been taught in the military decades ago. The arrest was anticlimactic after the pursuit. Handcuffs, Miranda rights, a short hike back to the nearest trail where a vehicle waited. Mercer said nothing during transport, just stared out the window as they drove out of the mountains, watching his kingdom disappear behind him. He would never see the North Cascades again. Vincent Mercer's trial began in Seattle on April 17, 2023. The prosecution, led by a federal prosecutor, presented a case built on overwhelming physical evidence, forensic analysis, and testimony from survivors and experts. The bunker itself became Exhibit A. The jury was shown extensive photographs and video documentation of the structure, the confinement chamber, the tally marks scratched into walls, the iron rings with frayed ropes still attached. Forensic experts explained what each element meant, how the structure had been built and maintained, and how it had been used to imprison Emma for 7 years. Emma's medical records were presented next. The forensic medical examiner testified about the injuries, the malnutrition, the evidence of prolonged captivity. X-rays showing improperly healed fractures. Blood test results showing severe vitamin deficiencies. Photographs of restraint marks and burn scars. Each piece of evidence was clinical, factual, but together they painted a devastating picture of systematic, long-term abuse. The environmental forensics were particularly compelling. The environmental forensics specialist explained how soil, pollen, and insect samples from Emma's body had led investigators directly to the bunker location. How the traces she'd carried out of captivity had been more reliable than memory, creating a scientific map of where she'd been held. But perhaps the most powerful evidence came from Mercer himself. During the search of his camp at Big Beaver Creek, investigators had recovered a journal. A thick, water-damaged notebook filled with handwritten entries spanning from 2012 to 2022. The journal entries revealed Mercer's deteriorating mental state over the years. Early entries discussed his beliefs about government surveillance, his conviction that hikers in the Cascades were actually agents monitoring him. Later entries became increasingly paranoid and disorganized. But the most damning entries were from July and August of 2015. Mercer had documented encountering 2 agents on the Cascade Pass Trail. He described following them, determining they were a threat, and deciding to neutralize them. The clinical language couldn't hide what he meant. He'd written about taking them to the facility, his term for the bunker, about separating them, about how the male agent had resisted and had to be eliminated. That entry was dated August 9, 2015, less than a month after Emma and Tyler had disappeared. Subsequent entries mentioned the remaining subject and described maintaining her in captivity as a way to gather intelligence about the operation against me. It was clear that Mercer had convinced himself Emma was some kind of undercover agent, and that keeping her imprisoned served some delusional purpose in his imagined war against government surveillance. The defense attempted to argue insanity. They presented Mercer's military records, his PTSD diagnosis, evidence of his deteriorating mental state over the years. Their argument was that Mercer was so deeply delusional he couldn't distinguish reality from paranoid fantasy, and therefore couldn't be held fully responsible for his actions. But the prosecution countered effectively. Yes, Mercer had mental health issues, but his actions showed planning, consistency, and awareness of consequences. He'd built the bunker carefully, choosing a location where it wouldn't be found. He'd maintained operational security for 7 years. He'd fled when investigators got close. These weren't the actions of someone completely detached from reality. These were the actions of someone who knew what he was doing was wrong and took steps to avoid getting caught. Emma's testimony was the emotional center of the trial. Due to her PTSD and the risk of re-traumatization from being in the same room as Mercer, the judge allowed her to testify via video link from a separate location. For 90 minutes, Emma described her experience. Her memory was still fragmented in places, and there were long periods she couldn't clearly recall. But she remembered the day she and Tyler were taken. Remembered Mercer appearing on the trail with a gun. Remembered being marched through the forest for hours. Remembered Tyler trying to fight back, trying to protect her, and then being separated from her. She described being kept in the smaller chamber, restrained by ropes attached to the iron rings. Described the darkness, broken only by brief moments when Mercer would bring minimal food and water. Described losing track of time, of scratching marks into the wall just to maintain some sense of days passing. She spoke about Tyler, about how she'd heard sounds of a struggle in the early weeks, about how one day the sounds stopped, about how Mercer had told her, with no emotion at all, that Tyler was gone. "I knew what that meant," Emma said quietly, her voice breaking. "I knew Tyler was dead, and I knew I was alone." She described years of isolation, of Mercer rarely speaking to her except to deliver paranoid accusations or demands, of her mind fracturing under the strain of sensory deprivation and loneliness, of contemplating giving up. But she also described survival, small acts of resistance, maintaining her sanity by reciting poems she'd memorized in college, by doing mental math problems, by scratching messages in the wall even though no one would see them, by refusing to let Mercer's delusions become her reality. And finally, she described her escape. How Mercer had started leaving for longer periods in the final months. How she'd noticed the earth wall weakening after heavy rains. How she'd used a small piece of metal, probably a nail that had fallen from a timber beam, to slowly, carefully excavate a hole over weeks of work. How one night, when Mercer was gone, she'd finally made the opening large enough to squeeze through. "I didn't know if I could make it," she testified. "I was so weak. I got lost in the dark. I thought I might die out there in the forest. But anything was better than going back to that place. Anything was better than giving up." The jury deliberated for 7 hours. They returned with verdicts on all counts. Guilty of kidnapping. Guilty of unlawful imprisonment. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Tyler Grant. The judge sentenced Mercer to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each count, to be served consecutively. It was the maximum sentence available under federal law. Mercer would die in prison. As the sentence was read, Mercer showed no emotion. He sat silently, staring straight ahead, as he was led away by federal marshals. His last view of the outside world was through the windows of a prison transport van as it carried him away from Seattle toward the federal penitentiary where he would spend the rest of his life. Emma's recovery continues. The physical injuries, the broken bones, the nutritional deficiencies, those have largely healed with time and medical care. But the psychological scars run deeper. She lives in an undisclosed location now, far from Washington State, far from the mountains where she lost 7 years of her life. She's in ongoing therapy, working with specialists in complex trauma and captivity-related PTSD. Some days are better than others. She still struggles with enclosed spaces, still can't tolerate darkness, still experiences hypervigilance and anxiety in crowded places. But slowly, incrementally, she's reclaiming pieces of herself that Mercer tried to take away. Through her attorney, Emma released a brief statement after Mercer's sentencing. She asked for privacy and understanding as she continues her recovery. But she also said something that struck everyone who read it. "Tyler saved my life," the statement read. "In those first days, he fought back. He resisted. He gave me time. Everything he did was to protect me. I survived because of him. I owe him everything. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. I will live the life he didn't get to live." The North Cascades National Park implemented significant changes after the case. Trail monitoring was enhanced with additional cameras and check-in requirements. Rangers increased patrols in remote areas. New protocols were established for responding to missing persons reports, including immediate deployment of environmental forensics teams. A memorial plaque was installed at the Cascade Pass Trailhead. It honors Tyler Grant and reminds visitors that the wilderness, as beautiful and peaceful as it appears, demands respect and caution. It lists safety guidelines: hike in groups, sign trail registers, carry GPS devices, stay on marked trails. For law enforcement, the case became a study in how to investigate disappearances in remote wilderness areas. The combination of traditional investigation, advanced forensics, and behavioral analysis created a new model for solving cases that had previously been written off as accidents or people simply lost to the mountains. Emma hasn't returned to the Cascades. Maybe she never will. But she's hiking again, in different mountains, with trusted friends, slowly reclaiming the passion that brought her and Tyler to that trail on a July morning in 2015. The wilderness took Tyler from her. But it didn't take everything. Emma survived. And in surviving, she ensured that Mercer's crimes would be exposed, that Tyler would be found, and that justice, however delayed, would finally be served. Thanks for watching until the end. It really means a lot. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what stood out to you most. And of course, make sure to subscribe to Seek Stories and hit the bell so you never miss the next mystery. See you soon.